My daughter gave her father-in-law a $25,000 cruise and handed me a $2 gas station lottery ticket. I'm Bill Garrett, and that moment changed everything. Not because the ticket won me $55 million, though it did, but because it finally gave me the power to reveal a secret I'd been keeping for 7 years. See, every major gift my daughter had ever received, her college tuition, her dream wedding, her house down payment, came from me. Nearly $1 million, all funneled through an anonymous trust while I lived like a broke man in a studio apartment. Her father-in-law had been taking credit for my money and my love for 7 years. When I saw him smiling as she thanked him for that cruise, I knew it was time to stop playing dead. Time to show my family who their real benefactor had been all along. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. Because this is the story of how a $2 lottery ticket helped me reclaim my daughter's love. Let me paint you a picture of how invisible I'd become in my own family. Christmas 2023. My daughter Becca sends out her annual family card. Beautiful glossy photo, professional lighting, everyone smiling in coordinated outfits. Her husband Chris, their daughter Emma, and right there in the center, Ed Morrison, her father-in-law, the man she calls the most generous person she knows. I wasn't in that photo, for the 3rd year running. When I asked Becca about it, she got that uncomfortable look. Dad, you know Ed paid for the photographer. It just made sense to include him. Ed paid for the photographer, with money that originally came from my bank account. But here's what really got to me. Last month, Emma's high school graduation. I'm sitting in the parking lot watching families stream into the auditorium. Then I see them, Becca, Chris, and Ed walking in together like some perfect little unit. Emma spots them immediately, runs over for hugs. She hugs Ed first. Longest hug, too. I walk up behind them and Emma's face falls just a little. Oh, hi, Grandpa Bill. That's what she calls me now. Grandpa Bill. Like I'm some distant relative they have to acknowledge. Ed gets Grandpa Eddie with the excited voice. You want to know the difference? Ed shows up to these events in his $90,000 BMW wearing a $2,500 suit. I drive my 2009 Honda Civic with 174,000 miles and duct tape holding the passenger seat together. I shop at Goodwill because that's the image I've maintained for 7 years. The image of a man who barely gets by. After the ceremony, they're all heading to dinner at Morton's Steakhouse. Ed's treat, of course. Becca pulls me aside. Dad, I know you probably can't afford Morton's, so we totally understand if you can't make it. Can't afford it. My daughter thinks I can't afford a $50 steak dinner. I smiled and told her I had other plans. Truth was, I could have bought the entire restaurant that night and still had millions left over. But I needed to see how far this would go. How completely I could disappear from my own family's story. The answer came last week. Emma's posting on Instagram about her amazing Grandpa Eddie, who always takes care of our family. Photo after photo of Ed at family events, Ed giving gifts, Ed being the patriarch. I scrolled through 2 years of her posts. Not one mention of me, not one photo. I'd been systematically erased. But here's what nobody knew. What I'd been documenting in a leather ledger I kept locked in my nightstand. Every deposit into the Morrison Family Trust, every transfer that made their lifestyle possible, every dollar that Ed had taken credit for. March 15th, 2017, $125,000 wedding fund established June 10th, 2018. $89,000 house down payment transferred September 5th, 2019. $45,000. Emma's private school tuition, 4 years, January 12th, 2021, $67,000. Chris's MBA program, December 20th, 2023, $38,000 family vacation to Hawaii total, $847,000 in 7 years. Not one penny from Ed Morrison's actual bank account. But every thank you note Becca wrote was addressed to the wrong man. Every Facebook post about their family's good fortune credited Ed's generosity. Every family gathering where Ed basked in gratitude that should have been mine. I'd created the perfect scam. The only problem was, I was scamming myself. Living in a $850 a month studio apartment while the man taking credit for my generosity lived in a $890,000 house that my money helped him afford to maintain. Because here's the thing nobody knew about Ed Morrison. His real estate business went under 3 years ago. He's been living off credit cards and lines of equity ever since. But as long as people thought he was the family benefactor, he could maintain the image. My money was propping up his entire fake empire, and my daughter worshipped him for it. You might be wondering why I let this go on for 7 years. Why I didn't just tell Becca the truth from the beginning. Because I was terrified of losing her completely. See, when my wife Catherine died in 2016, Becca was already pulling away. The cancer treatment had drained our savings, or so she thought. She'd see me eating ramen noodles for dinner and paying medical bills with crumpled 20s, and she'd get this look, like she was embarrassed. Her friends' fathers were successful businessmen, doctors, lawyers. I was a former financial advisor whose business failed after his wife's illness. At least that's the story I let everyone believe. The truth was more complicated. I had liquidated my visible assets to pay for Catherine's treatment, yes, but I'd also quietly moved our real wealth into shell companies and offshore accounts. When Catherine died, I made a decision. I would provide for Becca's future anonymously through the Morrison Family Trust, while appearing to have nothing. I thought it would be temporary, just until she graduated, maybe got married. Then I'd reveal everything and we'd have a good laugh about how I'd fooled everyone. But then Ed Morrison entered the picture. Chris's father was everything I wasn't, at least on the surface. Confident, well-dressed, always picking up dinner tabs. When Chris proposed to Becca, Ed immediately started talking about the wedding fund he'd established. The Morrison family takes care of its own, he'd say. That wedding fund was my money, channeled through the trust. But Ed presented it like it was his gift to the family, and Becca ate it up. For the first time since her mother died, I saw my daughter's face light up when she talked about family. Not about me, about Ed, how generous he was, how lucky she felt to be marrying into a family that valued financial security. So I stayed quiet. Because at least this way, she was happy. At least this way, she had a father figure she could be proud of. But the silence was killing me, and it was getting worse. 3 weeks ago, Emma asked Becca why I never came to family dinners anymore. Grandpa Bill is going through a hard time, Becca explained. Sometimes, when people don't have much money, they feel uncomfortable around family. They thought I was avoiding them out of shame, out of poverty. The reality was, I was avoiding them because watching Ed take credit for my love was becoming unbearable. But the real wake-up call came 2 weeks ago. I'm at the grocery store, buying my usual cart of store-brand everything, when I overhear Becca talking to another customer in the next aisle. My father-in-law is amazing, she's saying. He's basically supported our whole family since my dad couldn't anymore. I stood there holding a can of generic tomato soup, listening to my daughter explain to a stranger how her real father was a failure who couldn't provide, while her father-in-law was the family hero. That night I did something I'd never done before. I called the trust administrator and asked for a full financial report. 7 years of transactions. Every dollar I'd funneled into my daughter's life while Ed took the credit. The number was worse than I'd thought. $847,000. Nearly $1 million of my money, making Ed Morrison look like a saint while making me look like a deadbeat. But here's what really scared me. Emma was starting to treat me the same way. Polite distance, careful conversations, like I was a charity case they had to manage. Last month she asked Becca if I'd be okay financially, if maybe they should start a small fund to help with my expenses. My 15-year-old granddaughter was worried about my finances while sitting in a house I'd bought for her family. If I stayed silent much longer, I wouldn't just lose my place in the family narrative. I'd lose my family entirely. They'd see me as the poor relative who needed taking care of, while Ed remained the generous patriarch who held everyone together. In 5 years, Emma would graduate high school, funded by me but credited to Ed. She'd go to college, funded by me but credited to Ed. She'd get married, funded by me but credited to Ed. And I'd be the sad old man in the corner, grateful for whatever scraps of attention they could spare. Or worse, I'd be the relative they stopped inviting altogether, the one who couldn't keep up with the family's lifestyle. The embarrassment they'd eventually phase out completely. I was facing a choice: keep funding their lives while disappearing from their story, or tell the truth and risk destroying the happiness I'd worked 7 years to create. Either way, I was losing my daughter. The only question was whether I'd go down as a failure or a fraud.
That's when fate handed me a $2 lottery ticket and a chance to rewrite the entire story. Father's Day 2024.
The day everything started to unravel, Becca had invited me to their house for brunch. Just family, she'd said. Of course, that included Ed. I showed up with a bottle of wine, Chateau Margaux 2010, $400. I'd been saving it for a special occasion, though nobody would guess its value from the unmarked box I carried it in. Ed was already holding court on the back deck, wearing what I recognized as a $1,500 Hermes polo shirt. He was telling Chris about his latest investment opportunity. The key to generational wealth, Ed was saying, is knowing how to make money work for you instead of working for money. I almost laughed. Ed's last 3 business ventures had failed spectacularly. The only reason he could afford that shirt was the equity line he'd taken out against his house. A house he could only afford to maintain because my anonymous gifts kept his daughter-in-law's family financially stable, making him look successful by association. Becca appeared with a tray of gifts. "Okay, Father's Day presents time." She handed Ed a thick envelope first. "This is from all of us." Ed opened it slowly, making a show of reading the contents. His eyes widened in what I now recognize as practiced surprise. "A Mediterranean cruise, 14 days?" He stood up, beaming. "Becca, this is too generous." "You've been so generous to our family," Becca said, hugging him. "It's the least we can do." I sat there calculating. Royal Caribbean Oasis Suite, Mediterranean route, peak season, minimum $25,000, money that came from the trust fund I'd established, money Ed knew wasn't his. Then Becca turned to me. "And Dad, this is for you. A single $2 scratch-off lottery ticket." The symbolism was perfect. The man she thought funded her life gets a luxury cruise. Her actual father gets a gas station impulse buy. "I know it's not much," she said quickly, "but I thought it might be fun." Ed couldn't resist. "Well, Bill, you never know. Lightning might strike." The way he said it, like he was being gracious to the poor relative. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "lightning strikes exactly when it's supposed to." Something in my tone made Chris look up from his phone. But Ed was already moving on, showing everyone the cruise brochure. "The Mediterranean in July," he was saying. "I've always wanted to see Santorini." "You deserve it," Becca said, "after everything you've done for us." That's when I decided to test something. "Ed," I said, "remind me, when did you first start helping Chris and Becca financially?" The question caught him off guard. "Oh, well, family helps family. But specifically, when was the first transfer?" Ed's smile flickered. "I don't keep track of exact dates, Bill." "Interesting. I do." I pulled out my phone, opened the Notes app where I'd recorded every transaction. March 15th, 2017, $125,000 into the Morrison Family Trust for wedding expenses. Chris frowned. "How do you know the exact amount?" June 10th, 2018, $89,000 for the house down payment. Now Becca was staring at me. "Dad, why would you know those numbers?" Ed's face had gone pale. "Bill, I'm not sure what you're getting at." September 5th, 2019, $45,000 for Emma's private school tuition. 4 years paid in advance. "Okay, stop." Chris's voice was sharp. "What's going on here?" I looked directly at Ed. "Should I tell them, or would you prefer to?" For about 10 seconds, nobody spoke. Ed's hands were actually trembling. Then he forced a laugh. "I have no idea what Bill's talking about. These numbers could be anything." "Could be," I agreed. "Or they could be exactly what they are, detailed records of every deposit into the Morrison Family Trust." Becca looked between us, confused. "I don't understand." "The trust fund," I said. "That's been paying for your life for 7 years. The one Ed takes credit for managing." Ed stood up abruptly. "Bill, I think you're confused." "Am I?" I pulled out a different screen on my phone. "This is interesting. Alpine Holdings, LLC. Ever heard of it, Ed?" His face went white. "Dad, what is Alpine Holdings?" Becca asked. "It's the parent company," I said calmly, "that owns 40% of Summit Financial Group." Chris nearly dropped his beer. "That's where I work." "I know." "You know?" Chris's voice cracked. "What do you mean you know?" "I mean," I said, looking directly at Ed, "some people keep very detailed records of their investments." Ed was backing toward the house. "This is ridiculous. Bill, you're embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" I scratched the lottery ticket with my car key right there at the table. The first symbol, $50,000. Second symbol, $50,000. Third symbol, $50,000. But that wasn't the jackpot line. The jackpot line read, $55 million. I held up the ticket. Well, would you look at that? Becca gasped. Chris stared. Emma came running over from the pool. Ed looked like he was about to be sick.
$55 million, I said quietly. That's interesting timing. Dad, is that real? Becca whispered. Seems to be. I slipped the ticket into my wallet. Now, Ed, what were you saying about lightning not striking? He couldn't answer, because he knew exactly what this meant. The poor relative who supposedly couldn't afford dinner just became the richest person in the family. And I had 7 years of financial records that could prove where the family's money had really been coming from. I think, I said, standing up slowly, it's time we had an honest conversation about generational wealth. The lottery ticket changed the atmosphere immediately, but not in the way you might expect. Ed recovered his composure first. He had to. His entire house of cards was suddenly wobbling. Bill, that's fantastic, he said, forcing enthusiasm into his voice. What a stroke of luck. But I could see him calculating.
$55 million meant I wouldn't need to live modestly anymore. It meant questions would be asked about how a man who'd supposedly been struggling could suddenly make major purchases or lifestyle changes. Becca was staring at the ticket like it might disappear. Dad, you have to call the lottery commission. You have to verify this. I will, I said. But first, I think we should finish our conversation about family finances. Chris was still processing. Wait, back up, Dad. You said Alpine Holdings owns part of my company? Ed jumped in quickly. Bill's confused. He probably read something online. I'm not confused, Chris. I'm the majority shareholder. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma broke it. What does that mean, Grandpa Bill? Before I could answer, Ed's phone rang. He glanced at it and his face went even paler. I need to take this, he mumbled, walking toward the house, but I could hear him from the deck. No, I can't make the payment this week. Yes, I understand the interest is accumulating. Chris heard it too. Dad, what payment? Ed came back, phone off, trying to smile. Nothing important. Business call. On Father's Day? Becca asked. Business doesn't take holidays, Ed said, but his confidence was cracking. That's when my phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. Summit Financial Group Executive Line. I showed the screen to Chris. Should I answer this? Chris nodded slowly. Bill Garrett speaking. Mr. Garrett, this is Janet Kim from Summit Financial. I'm calling to confirm your Monday meeting with our senior management team. That's correct. And you'll be bringing the Alpine Holdings documentation? I will. Perfect. We'll have the conference room prepared for your presentation to the board. I hung up. Chris was staring at me. You have a meeting with our board? Monday at 9. About what? Shareholder concerns, I said simply. Ed's hands were shaking now. Bill, I don't know what game you're playing. No game, just business. Becca looked completely lost. I don't understand any of this. Emma tugged on her mother's sleeve. Mom, why is everyone acting weird? Good question. Why was Ed acting like a man whose secrets were about to be exposed? Why was he getting calls about payments he couldn't make? Why did his successful business require credit lines against a house that he could barely afford? I decided to plant another seed. Ed, you mentioned generational wealth earlier. What would you say the Morrison family's liquid assets are currently worth? He couldn't answer that question honestly, because the answer was negative. Ed Morrison was broke, propped up entirely by the appearance of wealth that my money had created. That's a personal question, Bill. Is it? I mean, if you're advising the family about investments, shouldn't they know your qualifications? Chris was watching this exchange with growing unease. Dad, what's going on between you two? Nothing, Ed said quickly. Bill's just had some good luck today and it's gone to his head. Has it? I pulled out my phone again. Chris, what's the biggest account you manage at Summit Financial? I can't discuss client information. Even if the client is sitting right here? Chris frowned. What do you mean? Alpine Holdings. What can you tell me about that account? Recognition dawned slowly on Chris's face. You're saying you're the Alpine Holdings client. I'm saying a lot of things are about to become clear. Ed stood up abruptly. I need to go. I just remembered I have plans. On Father's Day? Becca asked. But we haven't even eaten yet. Family emergency, Ed said, already heading for the door. But I called after him. Ed, don't forget. The Mediterranean cruise leaves in 6 weeks. You'll want to make sure all your accounts are in order before you travel. He froze in the doorway, because he knew what I was really saying. 6 weeks was plenty of time for a thorough audit of the Morrison Family Trust. Plenty of time to trace every transaction. Plenty of time to prove that every dollar he'd taken credit for had come from my accounts. We'll talk later, he said without turning around. After he left, the three of them stared at me. Dad, Becca said quietly, what just happened? What happened, I said, is that lightning struck exactly when it was supposed to, but I could see them processing the real question. If I had $55 million in lottery winnings, and if I owned part of Chris's company, and if I somehow knew details about a family trust that Ed had supposedly funded, who had really been taking care of their family all these years? I smiled and scratched another section of the lottery ticket. A smaller prize underneath, $10,000. You know what? I said. I think I'll cash this in tomorrow, right after my meeting at Summit Financial. The truth has a way of surfacing, especially when someone's been sitting on it for 7 years. Monday morning, I walked into Summit Financial Group wearing a $3,000 suit I'd had tailored 15 years ago, but never worn. Funny how expensive clothes look the same whether you bought them yesterday or kept them in storage. Chris was waiting in the lobby. His face was a mixture of confusion and professional anxiety. Mr. Garrett, what should I call you? Bill's fine. You're still my son-in-law. Are you really our Alpine Holdings client? Let's go to the conference room. I think everyone should hear this together. The senior management team was assembled. Chris, 3 VPs, and the company president, Michael Crawford. They'd laid out coffee and pastries like this was a normal client meeting. It wasn't. I placed a thick folder on the conference table. Gentlemen, we need to discuss some irregularities in the Morrison Family Trust account. Crawford leaned forward. What kind of irregularities? The kind where someone's been taking credit for transactions they didn't initiate. I opened the folder and spread out 7 years of bank records. Every transaction highlighted in yellow. Every transfer traced back to Alpine Holdings accounts. This is the complete financial history of the Morrison Family Trust, I said. As you can see, every deposit came from Alpine Holdings. Every major expense authorization came through my shell company. Chris was studying the papers. These dates, these match the gifts Dad said he was giving us, because they are the gifts. The only difference is who actually funded them. One of the VPs, Sarah Chen, was cross-referencing something on her laptop. Mr. Garrett, according to our records, Alpine Holdings has been Summit Financial's largest private client for 8 years. That's correct. You've had 40% ownership since 2016? Correct. Chris's face was pale. You've been my biggest client this whole time? Your biggest client's representative, I corrected. I prefer to work through intermediaries. Crawford was putting pieces together. Mr. Garrett, are you saying that Ed Morrison has been misrepresenting the source of these funds? I'm saying Ed Morrison has been taking credit for nearly $1 million in transfers that he didn't make. Sarah pulled up another screen. There's more. Mr. Morrison has been using these accounts as collateral for personal loans. That got everyone's attention. What kind of loans? I asked, though I already knew. Home equity lines, business loans, credit extensions. He's been representing himself as the trust's funding source to secure credit. Chris dropped the papers he was holding. He's been borrowing money based on Dad's accounts. $340,000 in outstanding loans, Sarah confirmed, all secured by his representation that he's the Morrison Family Trust benefactor. I let that sink in. Ed hadn't just taken credit for my generosity. He'd used my generosity as collateral to borrow money for himself. There's something else, Crawford said, checking his notes. Mr. Morrison scheduled a meeting for this afternoon. He wants to discuss liquidating trust assets for a major family expense. Let me guess, I said. A Mediterranean cruise? Crawford nodded. How did you know? Because I know exactly what Ed Morrison's been planning. He was going to drain the trust account to pay for that cruise, then claim it was a family gift funded by his generosity, Chris looked sick. He was going to steal Dad's money to pay for his own vacation? Your father-in-law has been playing a very sophisticated con game. The problem is he got too greedy. I pulled out my phone and called Ed's number, putting it on speaker. Bill? Ed's voice was nervous. What's going on? I'm at Summit Financial, Ed, with Chris and the senior management team. Silence. We're reviewing the Morrison family trust accounts. More silence. Ed, would you like to explain to everyone how you've been representing yourself as the trust's funding source? I don't know what you're talking about. Sarah leaned toward the phone. Mr. Morrison, this is Sarah Chen from Summit Financial. We have records of your loan applications claiming ownership of trust assets totaling $847,000. There's been a misunderstanding. Has there? I asked. Because I have 7 years of bank records showing every transfer came from Alpine Holdings. I also have recordings of conversations where you acknowledged knowing the true source of funding. That wasn't entirely true. But Ed's reaction would tell me everything I needed to know. You've been recording our conversations. Bingo. He just admitted he knew about the real funding source. Crawford looked stunned. Mr. Morrison, are you acknowledging that you were aware the funds didn't originate from your accounts? Ed's voice got smaller. Bill, we should discuss this privately. No, Ed, we should discuss this publicly, because you've spent 7 years publicly taking credit for my money. Chris was staring at the phone like it was radioactive. Dad, is this true? Chris, son, it's complicated. It's not complicated, I interrupted. Your father knew I was funding your family's lifestyle. He let me live in poverty while he took credit for my generosity. And then he used that fake credit rating to borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars for himself. Crawford cleared his throat. Mr. Morrison, we need you to come in immediately to discuss these loan defaults. Defaults? Ed's voice cracked. If you don't actually control the assets you used as collateral, these loans are in immediate default. I could hear Ed breathing heavily through the phone. Ed, I said quietly, you have two choices. You can come clean to the family about what you've done, or I can call Becca right now and explain why her father-in-law is about to be arrested for fraud. Arrested? Sarah nodded grimly. Misrepresenting assets for loan collateral is a felony. Bill, please, we can work this out. Can we? Because I've spent 7 years watching you accept gratitude that belonged to me. I've watched my daughter worship you for gifts you didn't give. I've watched my granddaughter learn to love you while barely tolerating me. My voice was still calm, but everyone in the room could hear the steel underneath. You took my money, Ed. You took my credit. You took my family's respect. And then you handed me a $2 lottery ticket like I was a charity case. The lottery ticket was Becca's idea. The lottery ticket was perfect, I said, because it gave me exactly what I needed to stop playing this game. Crawford was making notes. Mr. Morrison, we need you here within the hour, or we'll be forced to contact law enforcement. Ed hung up. Chris was staring at the table. My dad's going to jail. That depends, I said, on whether he's willing to tell the truth. I stood up, gathered my papers, and looked at each person in the room. Gentlemen, I'll be transferring the Morrison family trust accounts to a more transparent structure. Chris, you'll continue managing the investment portfolio, but under new guidelines. What about Dad? Your father has until tonight to decide whether he wants to face this as a family matter or a criminal matter. I headed for the door, then turned back. Oh, and Chris, that cruise your father was planning. It's been canceled. The card he was going to use is maxed out, and the bank just froze his accounts. That evening, I got the call I'd been expecting. Dad, we need to talk. Becca's voice was tight with stress. Where? Ed wants to meet at his country club. He says it's neutral ground. Neutral ground. The Fairmont Country Club, where Ed had been basking in reflected glory for 3 years, telling anyone who'd listen about his generous support of his son's family. Perfect. I arrived at 7 p.m. wearing the same $3,000 suit. The hostess knew Ed, of course. Mr. Morrison's party? Right this way. The private dining room was full. Becca and Chris, obviously. Emma, looking confused and worried, but also people I didn't expect. Dr. Patricia Hensley, the family's longtime physician, who'd apparently become close friends with Ed over the years. Judge William Carter, Chris's mentor from law school. Maria Santos, Becca's business partner. Even Tom Fletcher, the local bank president. Ed had assembled an audience of the most respected people in his social circle. People who knew him as the generous patriarch who'd lifted his son's family out of financial struggle. He was going to try to control the narrative one last time. "Bill," Ed stood up, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." I didn't shake it. "Ed." The room was tense. Everyone could sense this wasn't a normal family dinner. Ed raised his wine glass. "I wanted to gather our closest friends and family to address some misunderstandings that have come up recently." Dr. Hensley smiled warmly. "Ed, you don't need to explain anything to us. We all know how generous you've been to Chris and Becca." "Actually," I said, "that's exactly what we need to discuss." Ed's smile faltered. "Bill has had some concerns about the family trust arrangements." "Concerns?" I pulled out my leather portfolio. That's one way to put it. Judge Carter frowned. "Is there some kind of dispute?" "You could say that." I opened the portfolio on the table. "Ed, would you like to tell everyone how much money you've actually contributed to the Morrison Family Trust?" "Bill, I don't think this is the place. I think it's exactly the place. You chose the audience." I stood up, addressing the room like I was giving a presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen, for 7 years, Ed Morrison has been accepting credit for financial gifts totaling $847,000. College tuition, wedding expenses, house down payments, private school fees." Maria Santos looked impressed. "Ed, you never mentioned the amounts were so substantial." "Because Ed never wrote those checks." The room went quiet. I placed the first document on the table. Bank records showing every transfer into the Morrison Family Trust. Source, Alpine Holdings, LLC. Then the second document. Corporate registration for Alpine Holdings. Sole owner, William Garrett. Dr. Hensley looked confused. "I don't understand." "It means," I said calmly, "that every dollar Ed has taken credit for came from my bank account." Tom Fletcher, the banker, was studying the documents. "These are legitimate bank records. Completely legitimate. 7 years of transfers, totaling $847,000. Not one penny from Ed Morrison's accounts." Chris spoke up, his voice hollow. "Tell them about the loans, Dad." Ed's face went white. "Chris, that's not... Tell them about the $340,000 in loans you secured using Dad's money as collateral." Judge Carter straightened in his chair. "Ed, is this true?" "There's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding." I placed another document on the table. Loan applications from Ed Morrison claiming ownership of Morrison Family Trust assets, signed and notarized. Tom Fletcher was reading over the papers. "Ed, these are serious financial misrepresentations." "I was protecting the family's privacy." "You were committing fraud," Judge Carter said grimly. Emma spoke up, her voice small. "Grandpa Eddie, you didn't really pay for my school?" Ed couldn't look at her. "Emma, it's complicated." "It's not complicated," I said gently. "Your Grandpa Eddie has been taking credit for gifts he didn't give." Becca was staring at the documents. "Dad, this is real? You've been funding our life this entire time? Every major expense for 7 years. But you live in that tiny apartment because I chose to, because I wanted to see if you'd love me without the money." The room was silent except for the sound of papers rustling as people passed the bank records around. Dr. Hensley looked at Ed with disappointment. "How could you let Bill live like that while taking credit for his generosity?" Ed tried one last desperate play. "Everyone, please. Bill's been living modestly by choice. He has significant assets." "I have $12 million in liquid assets," I said simply. "I've had it the entire time. I've been choosing to live modestly while watching Ed take credit for my love." Maria Santos gasped. $12 million? Plus the $55 million from yesterday's lottery win. Tom Fletcher nearly choked on his wine. $67 million total? Give or take. Judge Carter was staring at Ed. "You knew Bill had this wealth." Ed couldn't deny it anymore. "I suspected he knew," I said. "I have recordings of Ed acknowledging that he wasn't the actual source of funding." "Recordings?" Dr. Hensley looked appalled. I pulled out my phone. "Ed, should I play the conversation from 3 weeks ago where you admitted you knew the money wasn't yours?" "Bill, please. The one where you said, and I quote, 'I know where the money really comes from, but Becca doesn't need to know that.'" Emma burst into tears. "Grandpa Eddie, you lied to us?" Chris put his arm around his daughter. "Emma, it's okay." "No, it's not okay." Emma stood up, facing Ed. You let us think Grandpa Bill was poor. You let us feel sorry for him. The social dynamics in the room had completely shifted. The respected businessman was now the exposed fraud. The pitied father was now the secret benefactor. Judge Carter stood up. Ed, I think you need legal counsel. This is a family matter. Defrauding loan applications is a criminal matter. Tom Fletcher was already on his phone. I need to call our fraud department immediately. Dr. Hensley looked at me with new respect. Bill, I owe you an apology. We all do. You don't owe me anything. You believed what Ed wanted you to believe. Becca was crying now. Dad, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I know you didn't. That was the point. Ed made one final attempt. Bill, we can fix this. I can pay back the loans. With what money, Ed? Your business failed 3 years ago. You've been living off credit cards and home equity lines. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. The Mediterranean cruise you're supposed to take next month? The credit card you were going to use is maxed out. The account is frozen. Ed sank into his chair, defeated. Judge Carter was making notes. Ed, you need to understand the gravity of this situation. Financial fraud, misrepresentation of assets, credit fraud, you're looking at felony charges. Unless, I said quietly, Ed is willing to make this right. Everyone looked at me. Public acknowledgement of the truth, full repayment of fraudulent loans, and a formal apology to the family he deceived. And if he doesn't? Chris asked. I looked at Ed. Then tomorrow morning I file criminal complaints for fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. Ed knew he was finished. His social circle now knew the truth. His business reputation was destroyed. His family knew he'd been living a lie. Bill, he said quietly, what exactly do you want? I want my daughter to know who really loves her, I said. I want my granddaughter to know who her real grandfather is, and I want you to understand that taking credit for another man's love was the cruelest theft of all. Emma walked over to me and took my hand. I'm sorry, Grandpa Bill, I should have known. How could you know? I hid it from everyone. But why? I looked around the room. Because I wanted to see if you'd love me for who I am, not what I could give you. We do love you, Becca said, crying harder now. We always have. Even when you thought I was broke? Especially then. For the first time in 7 years, I felt like a father again. 24 hours later, Ed Morrison sat across from me in a lawyer's office, signing papers that would change everything. The attorney, David Brennan, had laid out the terms clearly. Full restitution of fraudulent loans, public acknowledgement of the deception, transfer of any remaining Morrison family trust authority to me, and most importantly, a legal agreement preventing Ed from ever claiming credit for my financial contributions again. This is a non-disclosure violation agreement, Brennan explained to Ed. If you ever misrepresent the source of the Morrison family trust funding again, Mr. Garrett can pursue criminal charges without the statute of limitations applying. Ed's hand shook as he signed. What about the country club? My business relationships? That's not Mr. Garrett's problem, Brennan said. You destroyed those relationships yourself. I spoke for the first time in an hour. Ed, I want you to understand something. I'm not doing this for revenge. He looked up from the papers. I'm doing this because my granddaughter deserves to know the truth about her family. Because my daughter deserves to understand who really loves her. And because no father should have to watch another man steal credit for his love. Ed's voice was barely a whisper. I never meant for it to go this far. Yes, you did. You had dozens of opportunities to tell the truth. Instead, you borrowed money against my generosity. You used my love for my family to secure credit for yourself. Brennan placed another document on the table. This is the repayment schedule for the fraudulent loans. Mr. Morrison, you have 30 days to liquidate assets to cover the $340,000 in outstanding debt. I don't have those assets, Ed admitted. Then you'll need to sell your house. The words hung in the air. The $890,000 house that Ed had used to project success would now be sold to pay back money he'd stolen by pretending to be me. What about my son's family? Ed asked. Where will Chris and Becca? Chris and Becca will be fine, I said, because their real benefactor just came into $55 million. I pulled out another set of papers. I've established a proper family trust, transparent funding, clear beneficiaries, and honest administration. Brennan nodded.
The Garrett Family Trust will handle all future educational expenses, housing assistance, and family needs, with full disclosure of the funding source. Ed looked defeated. So I lose everything? You never had anything to lose, I said. Everything you've been living off for 3 years came from my money. You were already broke. The only difference now is that everyone knows it. The final document was the hardest one, a public statement acknowledging the deception. You want me to put this in the newspaper? Ed asked. I want you to tell the truth, publicly, the way you've been publicly taking credit for 7 years. Ed read the statement out loud. For the past 7 years, I have incorrectly accepted credit for financial gifts to my son's family totaling $847,000.
These gifts were actually funded by William Garrett through the Morrison Family Trust. I acknowledge that I used these misrepresentations to secure personal loans and that my actions constituted fraud. I apologize to the Garrett family and to the community for this deception. The Fairmont Country Club newsletter publishes this Thursday, I said. The local business journal runs it Friday, and it goes on your LinkedIn profile immediately. This will destroy my reputation. Your reputation was built on a lie. I'm just giving you a chance to tell the truth. Brennan collected the signed documents. Mr. Morrison, you're fortunate Mr. Garrett is handling this civilly. The district attorney was prepared to file felony charges. Ed stood up slowly. Bill, is there any way? No. My voice was final. You made your choices, Ed. For 7 years you chose to take credit for love you didn't give. Now you get to live with the consequences. But then I did something Ed probably didn't expect. However, I said, there is one thing. Ed looked up hopefully. Emma's 15th birthday is next month. If you want to give her a real gift, something that actually comes from your money, you're welcome to attend the party. You'd allow that? I'd allow you to be her grandfather, the real one, the one who gives gifts he can afford, tells stories about his own life, and doesn't pretend to be something he's not. Ed's eyes filled with tears. I don't know if she'll want that. Emma's smart. She'll figure out the difference between a grandfather who lies to impress her and one who loves her honestly. I gathered my papers and stood up. Ed, you want to know the really tragic part? If you'd just been honest from the beginning, you could have been part of this family without stealing from it. Chris married your son. Becca respected you. Emma loved you. Past tense. That depends on who you choose to be now. The man who spent 7 years living a lie, or the man who spends the rest of his life making it right. I headed for the door, then turned back one last time. The difference between us, Ed, is that I gave my money out of love. You took credit for it out of ego. Love builds families. Ego destroys them. An hour later, I was sitting in my car outside Emma's school when my phone rang. Grandpa Bill? Emma's voice was excited. Mom told me about the new trust fund. Does this mean I can go to any college I want? It means you can go to any college you earn your way into. And you'll really pay for it? Emma, I've been paying for everything your whole life. The only difference now is that you know it. I love you, Grandpa Bill. I love you too, sweetheart. For the first time in 7 years, those words felt real. The social earthquake that followed was swift and thorough. By Thursday morning, Ed Morrison's confession had appeared in 3 publications: the Fairmont Country Club newsletter, the Denver Business Journal, and somehow, the story had leaked to Channel 7 News. Local businessman admits to 7-year financial deception, the anchor reported. Edward Morrison, prominent member of Denver's business community, publicly acknowledged taking credit for nearly $1 million in family gifts that were actually funded by his son-in-law's father. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. The first call was from Tom Fletcher at the bank. Bill, I wanted you to know we've frozen all of Ed's accounts pending the fraud investigation. The FBI's white-collar crime unit wants to interview you. The second call was from Judge Carter. Bill, I owe you a formal apology. Ed's deception was sophisticated and frankly criminal. I've recommended he retain counsel immediately. The third call was from Dr. Hensley. Bill, Patricia here. I'm mortified that we all participated in Ed's charade. Is there anything I can do to make this right? You don't need to make anything right, I told her. You were deceived, just like my family was. But the social consequences for Ed were immediate and devastating. The Fairmont Country Club suspended his membership pending a review. 3 business partnerships dissolved within 48 hours. His remaining clients, the few who hadn't already fled his failing real estate company, terminated their contracts. Chris called me Tuesday afternoon. "Dad, there's something you should know. Ed's house went into foreclosure." "Already?" "The bank accelerated the timeline when they saw the fraud confession. He has 30 days to vacate." "Where will he go?" "I don't know. He called yesterday asking if he could borrow money for a security deposit on an apartment." The irony was perfect. Ed Morrison, who'd spent 7 years taking credit for my wealth, was now asking his son to help him afford basic housing. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd think about it. But honestly, Dad, I don't know if I can trust him anymore." That evening, Becca called with more news. "Dad, Emma's school called today. They wanted to verify the funding source for her tuition." "What did you tell them?" "The truth, that her real grandfather has been paying all along." "How did they react?" "The headmaster was embarrassed. Apparently Ed had been taking credit there too. He's been attending donor events, giving speeches about investing in education, accepting recognition for scholarship contributions he never made. Each revelation added another layer to the deception. Ed hadn't just stolen credit with the family, he'd built an entire public persona around my generosity. The Denver Business Journal followed up their initial story with a deeper investigation. Sources indicate Morrison used false financial representations to secure multiple loans totaling over $300,000. Federal prosecutors are reviewing the case for potential wire fraud charges. By Friday, Ed's professional reputation was completely destroyed, but the personal costs were even higher. Emma came to see me Saturday morning. "Grandpa Bill, I need to ask you something." "Anything." "Are you disappointed in us? For believing Grandpa Eddie instead of knowing the truth about you?" I sat down next to her on my new apartment's couch. "Yes, I'd already moved out of the studio, a modest 2-bedroom place where Emma could have her own room when she visited." "Emma, you were 13 when this started. How could you have known?" "But Mom and Dad should have known. Your parents believed what they were told by someone they trusted. That's not their fault. It's Ed's fault for lying." "Will you forgive us?" "There's nothing to forgive. You loved me when you thought I was poor. That's the only thing that matters." Emma hugged me. "I want to write Grandpa Eddie a letter." "What kind of letter?" "Telling him that lying to family is wrong, but also that if he wants to be a real grandfather, I'll give him another chance. That's very mature. You taught me that, by forgiving us when you didn't have to." 2 weeks later, I got a call from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Ed Morrison was being indicted on federal fraud charges. He'd made the mistake of using interstate banking to secure some of his loans, making it a federal case. But here's what surprised me. When the FBI agent asked if I wanted to file additional charges for identity theft and financial fraud, I said no. "Why not, Mr. Garrett?" "Because," I said, "he's already lost everything that mattered. His reputation, his family's trust, his home, his business. Prison won't teach him anything he hasn't already learned. You're more forgiving than most fraud victims. I'm not forgiving him. I'm choosing not to destroy him completely. There's a difference." Ed Morrison was sentenced to 3 years probation and 500 hours of community service. He now works at a nonprofit helping seniors avoid financial fraud. The irony is perfect. 6 months later, Emma's 16th birthday party was everything it should have been. Small gathering, close family, honest relationships. Ed came. He brought a gift he'd bought with his own money, a $30 Barnes & Noble gift card, and a handwritten note apologizing for the lies and promising to do better. Emma hugged him and said, "Thank you for telling the truth, Grandpa Eddie." That simple exchange meant more than 7 years of expensive gifts he'd never actually given. Becca and I have rebuilt our relationship completely. She visits twice a week now, and we talk about everything, including money. She understands now that wealth without honesty is meaningless, and that love without recognition is worthless. Chris transferred to a different department at Summit Financial to avoid any appearance of impropriety. He's managing other accounts now, though he jokes that none of his other clients are quite as mysterious as his father-in-law. As for me, I moved into a proper house. Nothing extravagant, a comfortable 3-bedroom in a good neighborhood where Emma can have friends over, and Becca can visit without feeling like she's checking on a charity case.
I kept the 2009 Honda, though. It runs fine, and I've grown attached to it. The lottery money went into a combination of investments and philanthropy. I established the Catherine Garrett Foundation for Cancer Research, named after my wife. Emma helps me review grant applications. But the most important change is this: my family knows who I am now. Not the poor father who needed their pity, and not the secret benefactor who bought their love.
Just Bill Garrett, a man who worked hard, saved his money, and chose to spend it on the people he loved. Emma asked me recently why I hid my wealth for so long. Because I wanted to know if you'd love me without it, I told her. And now you know. Now I know. The truth is that $2 lottery ticket was the best gift Ed Morrison ever gave me. Not because of the money, but because it forced the truth to surface. Sometimes the smallest gestures reveal the biggest lies. And sometimes the biggest lies, once exposed, clear the way for the most honest relationships. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family's story, I want you to know something. Your love matters, even when it's not acknowledged. Especially when it's not acknowledged. But don't wait 7 years to set the record straight. Truth delayed is often truth destroyed. Some battles are worth fighting, and the battle for recognition of your love is one of them.